I know I have to modernize a bit. I don't pretend it's some sort of magic solution. All digital innovation is, at its simplest definition, is everything we do, can it be slightly more effective and efficient if we use some digital techniques?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Modern Membership Org podcast. My name is Riley. I'm with Bursting Silver, and I'm excited to introduce a very special guest today, all the way down from Australia. We've got Chris Walton. He spent 4 decades inside the union movement, from organizing banks and insurance workers in the 1980s to founding the ACTU's Union Innovation Hub. The movement-owned technology platform has now shared by more than 30 Australian unions, and he's got a lot of research under his belt in terms of how unions operate and ways to engage more effectively. So Chris Walton joins us to unpack what North American unions can borrow from that playbook and to get members off the sidelines behind their campaigns, and why buying technology as a movement beats going at it alone. Without further ado, Chris, welcome to the podcast.
G'day, Riley. Nice to be here.
Excellent having you here as well. I appreciate you making the time, especially given the time change. We're kind of 2 ships sailing between sunrise, sunset here. So it's impressive coordination.
I think you're ahead, so let us know who won the race and I'll put a bet on.
Sounds good. Yeah, that's teamwork right there. So for those that don't know you, maybe take this time, give yourself a little introduction and let people know where you're at with the Innovation Hub.
Yeah, well, it's shocking to think I've been a full-time union official for now 40 years, but very lucky to, my background's as an organiser, really, trying to grow unions and get unions members more engaged and active so I can win campaigns. Set up a Organising Works program, a traineeship for organisers in Australia in 94 after starting with the bank and insurance unions. And then we became the training arm of equivalent of the ACTU, which is like the AFL-CIO and the CLC. Worked a lot with unions so that we could get stronger and more effective. And then became the assistant secretary of the ACTU in 2002, ran a few campaigns like Your Right to Work, where we kicked out a Conservative government and Prime Minister lost their own seat, which was big in our country. And then went back and ran a union, a small union. And while I was there, realised I'm a bit old and backwards in my ways, needed to improve my craft. And this little thing, the interwebby, wasn't going away, as one union official said, and had to just learn digital and see, although there's no new principle of organising and campaigning and unionism, I realised there's some new tools and I had to wake up and we tried a lot of things and it worked, and then went back to my old mates in the union movement and said, look, if we all go one off, it's going to be too slow and too costly. So we're now part of the ACTU, fully owned by the ACTU, fully owned by unions, and working together in a user group to get ahead and faster and at lower cost.
Yeah, that's. I think it's kind of foundational with unions doing the united front and working together. So
Unions believe in the collective. We don't always act collectively. So even silly things like buying power, things we got to purchase, why don't we use a collective approach? It's don't let it get on in the union movement, this idea of collective. Seriously, we talk about it, but we weren't, in Australia at least, we weren't really working together on some of these things as well as we could have.
Yeah, and touching on that too, then when it comes to the Union Innovation Hub, why did the Australian movement then at that point decide that it needed a collective approach for digital?
Yeah, well, if you get digital's part of the future, then how do we get there? We can all go one off. And we've all heard the horror stories, of custom builds and multi-million dollar, things that never finish and da-da-da-da. And it's pretty mission critical to at least process the fees, yet alone our other critical union work, case management, et cetera, et cetera. So we just said, if we all go one off, it's just going to be too expensive and take too long. So the ACTU backed us to set up the hub, and it's an incredibly simple model. That is, we work as a user group. So the basic principle being, if we start, surely unions have at least some common things they all do and have. So can't we build, with whatever platform we choose, can't we build the functionality that is shared? that covers 90 odd % of what unions need. Still be able to configure for each union and customize if need be. And then have an ongoing user group that is able to share not only best practice, but ongoing improvements, because it should never end, especially with AI now. The innovation should never end. And if every union's got to fund that innovation itself, it won't happen. So we came to a view that we needed a new model, and we called it the hub, and it took off. We got about 2/3 of the union movement in Australia and New Zealand now all working together. They operate separately, but we've got at least a user group of where we can get ahead a bit faster and at lower cost.
When it comes to coming to the table then for input on improvements or reviewing the technology that's built on the hub's foundation so far, how do those new updates get triaged as a group?
Yeah, this is a really important question. So every union's got their own system. We've just got a base that means you get ahead at lower cost. And obviously, if the base meets 90% of your needs, implementation costs are smashed. Right, they're so much lower, and then you're sharing ongoing improvements. So every quarter, at least, we update and do improvements, and there's constant new things unions are wanting and needing. But if a union wants to go ahead on their own, they can. Like, they can do a custom part. But usually, when a union has an idea, we then say to other unions, "What do you reckon? Are you interested?" And then it's always an opt-in, optional, but we either just do it and then it's shared by everyone, or a union goes ahead and makes it available to everyone, an improvement, or we put the hat around model where unions who choose to want that innovation can share the cost. Or one of our partners like Bursting Silver builds an innovation and makes it available. So it works really well. You can't make sure it's all decision by committee all the time. A union has to be able to get ahead, but in nearly every time that union makes that enhancement available to other unions at no cost usually.
Yeah, I like that hat around approach too. Kind of put it up to the board and see who else out there thinks that's a good idea. That's really cool. And when we're talking about tools, I think a lot of what we'd like to explore today too, at least for our listeners out here in Canada and North America, is maybe highlighting the differences between how unions in Australia are organizing versus unions in North America. Maybe not explaining to the unions because they probably know it better
They know their system,
myself.
but yeah, the difference. I've been a studier of the Canadian system. I went over there in '96 and did a thorough study in that because I'm fascinated by I love the Canadian union movement. Your density's still very high compared to a lot of other Western countries in Canada, and obviously US has an incredibly difficult time of it. The unions there with union busters, etc. And I studied that intensively. So I've followed it for many, many years. But one of the main differences, many Canadian unions probably and US unions know this, but just one of the main differences in Australia is we're open shop. That is, we have to recruit and retain members as well as engage them and make them active to win campaigns. And that's the case in obviously right to work states in the US, and increasingly that trend's happening. Thank goodness in Canada, and I hope it always stays, you got the RAND model or formula, and so that you don't have the free rider problem we have. If you get the collective agreement, obviously, you get the members. Well, they don't have to be members, I suppose, but you know what I mean. They pay, and you have less of a retention issue. But the Canadian friends I've got there, they stress it's not enough to have them as members. They've got to be active and engaged members if we're going to win, which is why we exist. We don't exist to get fees in. We exist to make a difference to workers' life. And obviously, Canadian and US unions have a massive organising challenge. We have to do a lot of organising in internal organising where to not only get them active, but to retain. So, for example, in Australia, one of our good unions has a 25% turnover of members just because their sector, it's in retail, and their sector churns. So you can imagine that. You've got to get 25% of your members each year to stay stable, let alone grow. In Australia, we're growing at the moment at 12.5% since 2022. And that's despite the churn of members and the need to retain members. So most of it's the same, but we got that extra challenge, as some US unions have, of also having to recruit and retain members as well.
And so you call out a pretty important, or it's something I've talked to Al about as well when it comes to engagement from association leaders. And it sounds like there's a common thread between Australian unions and Canadian unions in trying to encourage engagement from their membership. So when we're looking at that, what kind of levers or techniques do you think leaders should be looking towards in order to encourage that membership engagement?
Yeah, look, whether in Australia where we need that to retain the members, or in Australia and Canada and US where we need it to get active members, engagement is the key. Getting members who move from inactive or just paying their fees or not even wanting to be in the union but having to pay, to people that are active and engaged members. We all know that is so critical to winning and to having the power to make a difference, whether it be in union bargaining negotiations or in broader campaigns with government or with community. So it's always been thus. It's tough, right? And how you move from uninvolved, apathetic people to active members and build up our workplace leader structures and have members ready to go. And at times when they need to withdraw their labour to win, it's always a challenge. There's no new principle in that challenge. To be able to engage with them around their issues, develop our internal leaders who can communicate and ensure we work towards the education necessary to get the collective action. But digital can help. Yeah, that's the big thing that I learnt is no new principles, but new tools. And I can bore you with the things we're doing and trying, but they work. They're just a tool, but to be able to identify our workplace leaders, our union stewards more through those that are more active so that we've got, our warm potential leaders, in our case, our warm potential members that we sign up. There's a range of techniques I can bore you with, but they work. I mean, being able to personalize, being more relevant, having the user experience of the member, having the data to know where our weaknesses and strengths are, all obvious stuff. It's just the digital gives us the tools to do it all a little more efficiently and effectively, not replacing the fundamental in unions of talking one-on-one or to groups, but the digital helps us funnel that activity to where it's most effective.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned user experience as well. It's another one that Al was highlighting. Just with the advent of all technology that we work with every day, even on our smartphones, when it comes to something that isn't working how you expect it to, there's nothing more frustrating.
And the workers will in part judge us and members judge us on that experience.
Yeah, big time. I want to follow this trend towards the member journey and getting your insights on what you've found in your research. But there's one item too I wanted to highlight just between that membership churn that you see in Australia of 25%, where in the Canadian portion of it, members don't actually quit. But they can still become disengaged. And without having that metric, you can't quite tell when people are falling off if there's no number of
Yeah.
unregistered. So what signals maybe would you encourage leaders to look for?
Yeah, this is where the data is so critical. I mean, how do we know we're ready for a fight? I mean, Canadian unions battle this all the time and US unions. We got to know. In Australia, it's a bit more vivid. They can just stop being members, right? But there's a range of ways we can know our engagement. I mean, we've used a range of techniques, but what became very clear is the obvious, that where they were engaged in activity, it might have been opening their member portal where their content's unique and relevant, and therefore they do. It might have been coming to a union meeting, engaging, seeking support on a workplace issue. It might have been doing an online activity, etc. But we need one source of truth on that. We need to know. Or it might have been we've phoned them, they've phoned us, they've gone and helped in a lobby in an effort with visiting local politicians, whatever. They're on the bargaining committee for the union agreement. Do we track that? And we need a system that can easily track that. And then we need to know, now we use things like engagement scoring, where whatever those things are, and it might be unique each union, you can put a weighting on it. So for example, you could give each of those activities, open an email 1 point, lead the bargaining committee 10, right? Be the steward, a 9 or something. So you can put weight on all those activities and actually measure them. and know your at-risk members in Australia's case, because it's proven the lower engagement are the ones we don't retain. You mightn't have the retention issue, but it's the same principle, that the lower the engagement, the less active, the less likely we are to win our campaign. So you can, through techniques such as engagement scoring, spot your at-risk members or your low engaged members. Also, importantly, spot your very active members who we mightn't at the moment have acting in more formal roles, like your workplace unions, your union stewards or workplace rep roles. So, you can do that, yet alone use the technology to deal with any payment, union dues collections issues or whatever else. You can automate a number of these activities to help us do our jobs better.
Yeah, I love gamification. So when it comes to engagement scores and being able to rack that up, some organizations don't show those scores, and some do. It plays well into however they operate. I think being able to.
Yeah, well, I think in unions, we want to do a good job. We want to support members, but also empower members so that we can win. So, we've always, tried in campaigns measure the level of activity and how many filled in the survey and did the petition, and to know whether we are ready for a fight and not kid ourselves. But also those metrics also can be very important with our union stewards, our workplace reps, where they share in those goals that we're trying to hit. And to be able to break our workplace down to its subsections, might be a shift, might be a floor, department, whatever, to know whether we have a contact in each area and what's the level of activity in each area, and be able to track it and see it, and then roll up to the whole employer, roll down to a workplace, roll down to a shift or a department or section, so that we've got the data to know our levels of engagement and activity, such as what percentage filled in the survey or the petition from the particular.
Yeah, you touched on this a little bit earlier too, when it comes to using these tools and leveraging the digital aspect. The automation can sometimes feel like it's at odds with that human relationship and speaking to your stewards, and the losing touch by being online. How do you automate member journeys then without the union starting to feel like it's just a subscription service, or you're signed up for a website?
It's a very, very good question. So we've built in Australia and New Zealand, we extensively use member journeys. And what is a member journey? It's an automation where, there's a trigger point such as someone joining, and then they're put on, say, an onboarding journey. They're put on a process where they are contacted for, say, 6 months or 12 months, so that we ensure they understand all the aspects of the union, why it's important to be a member, and how to be actively involved, and what type campaigns the union's running. So it's just, it's an automated, and it's segmented by our industry sector, careers, whatever, by the type of, so it can be personalised. And that's in Australia, that's proven to improve membership retention. Now, on average, a union member in Australia lasts just over 8 years, and that's with an open shop. So, it's very important to have that member engaged. Plus, of course, it's critical to get them active, to know what's involved. So all it is just trigger point, someone joins. Yes, in that journey, you want the union steward or workplace rep to chat to them, or the union staff rep, but you can also build in a series of emails and texts that just introduce them to the elements of the union. And if they do open it, they then get this. If they don't, they get encouraged. It might be encourage them to use. We have member portals in Australia where part of our system is you get a content, welcome, hi, Chris, here's the relevant content and news for you, for your workplace or employer or industry or sector. So it's personalised, and I can update my details, etc. So it really, those journeys make such a difference, Riley. It's proven.
Yeah.
And of course, coming up to a campaign, those journeys, we can segment. So someone who did fill in the pledge or the petition gets this and asks for the next action. Those that haven't get encouraged to do this. And you're constantly segmenting. But they're always on, a lot of those journeys. You can do unique ones for campaigns. We do use them for... in Australia, if someone doesn't finish filling out the join form, you can follow them up automatically, and that's successful. You can use them, as I said, for next best action. Someone's done something, then you encourage them to do the next thing. So it doesn't replace the fundamentals of face to face, but boy, you can give yourself a leg up and use the tools to, as I said, spot your areas you need more intensive work and spot your real good potential workplace leaders and stewards who you can then make a beeline for and have the personal chat to try and lock them into more action and activity. So yeah, it's been really successful in Australia. One of the best things we've done is those journeys, not to replace fundamental face-to-face, but to leg up, use the tools to make it a bit easier.
Yeah, and I think that's just a matter of thinking from my own perspective. If I was registering for something, I need to know where things are. Having that information available to me when I sign on is goes back to that member experience you're talking about. If I'm lost, I'm not going to be a very happy member. If I have to navigate through a bunch of places that I don't know, can't find the information I need, where's the value?
I'm part of the club. I mightn't have known I was getting part of the club. I might have been active to get it there in the first place. But if I'm part of it, I want to be part of it. Unions want those members to feel part of it and get active. And so let's at least help them understand how to navigate around what we're doing, what we're active in, and not, staff get very busy and have a lot of multiple priorities, and at least we can have some things always on. And we can use the data from that to help us focus staff and our workplace leaders into areas that are going to have the most bang.
So I wanted to just kind of round off our conversation about the digital side of it, because engagement, obviously, it's either one of the chicken and the egg things. It's a part of it because it's something we really want from our members, but it's only one half of what you've suggested is needed from the audience. The other half, as we've kind of talked about today, is rests heavily on using digital to organize for growth, like in Australia, addressing that churn issue that you've seen, or even in Canada, having a measurement of how much of your membership is ready to organize.
And in Canada, in your organising, and US in organising campaigns about whether we're ready to go to certification, whether we've got enough cards, whether we've got support, who our leaders are, blah, 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 blah. Very fundamental. I've been talking a lot about engagement in where we've already got members, but in US and Canada, really fundamental in using those techniques in our organising.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've highlighted a lot of use cases, I think, today in terms of automated processes and reasons for why that's important and still maintaining that human relationship. Are there any other tools at play on a digital front that organizers could use in their workplaces or even in their industry specifically to talk to or connect with their members?
Yeah, so we've got a number of integrated tools. Obviously, we all use surveys and petitions and other campaign action tools. The importance is they're integrated into your, want a better description, mothership, your CRM, your membership system database, so that we know who's doing things and is active. So by having those tools, I mentioned the journeys. Increasingly, it's getting easier to use digital to build, for the risk of the jargon, the top of the funnel, the potential member list. So if we are organising to be able to get out to an area and be able to get people to self-identify as potential members and get them on a prospects list and then work that. So, for example, this sounds a weird one, we put out some content. In my old union, we were doing engineers at one stage. We were representing engineers or trying to organise engineers. So we put out the summary of the graduate rates of pay for engineers and said, if you give us your name and email, we'll give you a summary. And I think we just trialled it, and in 2 weeks, 3,000 gave us their name and email. Now, that's not organising a union, right? That's just getting your starting points. But there's a range of techniques that with digital, some industries, there's a lot of people use LinkedIn, and you can talk about mapping the workplace. You go into LinkedIn and there's a list of a load of names and occupations in there. So I could go on and on and on, but it's just using no new principle, but using some techniques that just help us get there a bit quicker. You can put a range of those potential members on a bit of a journey as well to see who even opens the email, and they might be warmer. And that's not replacing meetings outside workplaces and all the rest of it, but it's just and then using the data to know where we're strong and weak in those different areas and help us with our rating of potential members and other techniques that are pretty common, but we just track it, I suppose, a bit more effectively.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of having as many insights and signals at your disposal to make some informed decisions, and being able to rely on that data too is key. So from what we talked about today, if the leaders that are listening to this podcast right now are to take away one principle about member engagement specifically, what should that be as the fundamental principle?
Well, I'm sure you're ahead of where I was as an old union official. I know I have to modernize a bit. I don't pretend it's some sort of magic solution digital, but all digital innovation is at its simplest definition is everything we do, can it be slightly more effective and efficient if we use some digital techniques? We're going to run a survey anyway. Wouldn't it be handy we automatically knew who did the survey by area and any potential member that filled it in Australia's case? So it's just, let's embrace digital. But if we're going to embrace digital, not as a new whiz-bang solution, but as part of the solution, as new tools, then if we're going to embrace it, then let's try and help each other get there a bit quicker and faster, share techniques, share best practice, but also get the infrastructure necessary to be able to get there faster. And it's not only the infrastructure, it's the culture. The biggest difference in my old union for progress was have a go. I don't know if that's a fancy word for innovation, but every now and then there was a debate, should we do this or do this? Well, why don't we just give it a go, do it both ways, A/B test it, and let data measure what was effective or not. So have a go. Obviously, there's some new skills, but they're not new principles. And make sure we got the technology and infrastructure that makes that relatively easy. And that's what we did with the hub. We said we got to make sure we got that infrastructure and that's now available in Canada and US, by the way. It is our movement here has decided that now we've done this and got this base, and we call it Union Suite for iMIS, that we should be making that available around the world for at least an option, because Australian unions will benefit the more that sharing and improving the systems. It's a mutual benefit. So we decided to do that recently, and working with Bursting Silver in Canada and US. So
yeah, we just have a go. I look forward to more Australian terminology bleeding its way up in here to Canada.
She'll be right, mate.
Yes, exactly. Well, Chris, it's been wonderful having you on here. If anybody wanted to follow up for more of the insights, playbooks, and techniques, where would they be able to reach you at?
Yeah, look, we're fully owned by unions. We're not for profit for unions. So our view is everything we've done is available. All the guides, the how-tos, etc., as well as the actual iMIS for unions system is now available as a starting point for Canadian and US unions. We want the hub to be the international hub. We think all unions, including Australian unions, will benefit the more involved. So just talk to you, Riley, or you can give them my details. Absolutely. We're in partnership we needed a local partner. You've got to have a local partner. We're not implementing in Canada and US. We're using partners such as Bursting Silver, but we're making everything available as a starting point. So yeah, don't hesitate. Feel free to ask for a demo of what we've actually built. Check for yourself if it is useful, if it does meet 90% of your needs. If it does, you can imagine if that's your starting point, your project's massively reduced in cost and risk. Then if you do end up working with us, you don't have to go with that to still access all those resources. But if it is a benefit to you in the system sense, the infrastructure sense, then demo is available. You make a judgment. And if you do go ahead, we'd love you to be part of the hub. Work with other unions as a user group, so we can all get ahead faster and at lower cost.
Beautifully said. Yeah, and I'll make sure to keep some links there too in the show notes to some of those resources if people want to take a look further. But I know it's early. You probably still have a coffee to get to, and I have a dinner to run to as well. So, Chris, It's been wonderful having you on. Thanks again for making the time. Appreciate you coming on the call.
Thanks, Riley. I hope this didn't put you asleep. We might be able to put these podcasts out for insomniacs in case they're struggling to sleep, but I hope it was a bit more interesting than that. Anyway, love US and Canadian union movement, and I hope we can all work together. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, Chris. Take care. All right. Big thanks to Chris Walton for jumping on board, and thank you for listening. If you wanted to get any of those resources that Chris mentioned, those are going to be in the show notes here below. And if you liked what we talked about today, we're the Modern Membership Org podcast. My name's Riley with Bursting Silver, and we launch every Tuesday. If you want to subscribe, we're on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, all of that jazz. Appreciate you for listening, and all the best in your modernization movement. See you next week.